Keeping the action rolling here, diving into our next segment about the Philadelphia Eagles staying in the NFC. A lot has been said about their season. I've mentioned it before on this show. A great start to the season last year. They were 10-1 at one point, and then to end it, they really collapsed. Specifically, talking about them, the Eagles, not the sort of records you want to set. They became the first team since the 1986 New York Jets to start a season 10-1 and then finish with five or more losses and not win their division. Very just unbelievable to think about. If you would have told me that at 10-1, sitting at 10-1, top of the NFC, top of their division, that none of those things were going to happen and that they wouldn't have that first round bye, I think 95% of people would have said that you're crazy or you have no idea what you're talking about. But, that's what ended up happening. The Eagles, not very fortunate in how they finished their season. They lost the last 6 out of the 7 games to close out the year, wrapping it all up with that loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the first round of the playoffs. Then this offseason turned into a pretty crucial one for the Eagles with how much success that they had in that Super Bowl year, and then to follow it up with a very disappointing and just devastating way to end it all, to finish off the career of Jason Kelsey also like that, and just have this sort of change now in the organization. It left a lot of bad taste in people's mouths, and following the loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they got rid of their offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, and also their defensive coordinator, Sean Desai. A lot of, heat fell on those two guys. To some was merited just because, they're inexperienced guys. People don't know too much about them, so it's easy to just pick on those guys and say that it was because of the inexperience, it was because they don't really know what they're doing in some people's minds. I thought they did a lot better than people would give them credit for, but at the end of the day, when you have a season like that, you have those results there towards the end of the year with the talent that the Philadelphia Eagles have, consequences have to follow those sort of results, and that unfortunately is what happened to these guys. But that might not be the whole story. One of their running backs, Kenneth Gainwell, recently was on the Havian University podcast, and he sort of gave some reasons as to why he believes the collapse happened in the second half of the year. He said on that interview that I think it was a connection piece. Teams like the Chiefs are well connected, upstairs and downstairs, front office and locker room. When you have a connection, everything just clicks. But when you've got guys that aren't talking to each other, you never know what's going on. And that's a pretty accurate statement in just my evaluation of watching a good amount of Eagles games, just because they're a good team. But also I have some buddies that are Eagles fans, so I did catch myself watching a lot of their games. With the talent that they have, yeah, I got them over the line a few times. There was a few close games in there where you saw some iffy plays, but they got the result, and that's really, really what it all boils down to. But you saw it in some glimpses where Jalen and the wide receivers might not have been on the same page. A bad throw is thrown somewhere where it wasn't supposed to, or the receiver is expecting it somewhere else, and then you have Jalen and the receiver looking at each other like each of them has four heads, and nobody really knows what to do in that moment. It looks pretty bad when the quarterback and the wide receiver don't fall on the same page and know what the other one is going to do, or just know how that play is supposed to turn out. And also, you saw some false starts. The efficiency really in the red zone was a major talking point with the Eagles not being on the same page, on Kenneth Gainwell's point, not being on the same page, not having that synergy from offensive linemen to receivers to running backs to quarterback, not having that all. It really costs you in the red zone because if you just think about it, it makes sense. There's less room to sort of move around, to maneuver in there, extend plays, and create something if a play breaks down. If everybody doesn't know the cadence, the play, if they all don't fall and move to the same rhythm, especially in the red zone, it falls short, and a lot of times they just had to settle for field goals. And if their defense wasn't standing up to them and complementing that offensive drive. They got outscored a lot of the times, and they just weren't able to keep up with other offenses, mostly in the playoffs, because everybody in the playoffs is good, obviously, so that comes at a higher cost when you get later in the year. And miscues on defense as well, just talking about it. Again, not having that connection like Kenneth Gainwell says. You see some defensive backs thinking the other guy's going to cover their man. They think they're going to switch. One guy doesn't switch. One guy stays low. And then you have a wide open receiver down the field, and everybody's looking around like who was supposed to cover that guy. If the zones aren't working, it could leave massive gaps in their defense. So it was a lot of stuff like that. Not being able to stop the run also didn't help out at all. All that sort of stuff kind of shows you why Kenneth Gainwell is right. How much of that can you put on the coach? At the end of the day, the coaches will give a play that they think will work. A lot of the times, obviously, it doesn't. It's a bad play. But if it's miscues like this, the false starts, some guy not really paying attention, or the whole team not really paying attention and knowing what they're supposed to do, it looks pretty sloppy, and that would be how I would describe the Eagles to end the year. Very sloppy play, and just not accustomed to seeing this out of them. And then, because of these changes, they bring in Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball to lead these sides, the offense and the defense. And plus, they just brought in more talent and more guys that they felt could help them out. Saquon Barkley, Bryce Huff. They brought back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They drafted Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, and they also brought in Devin White as well on the defensive side of the ball. So on top of just these miscues and the connection that Kenneth Gainwell says, they just brought in more talent, and I think they needed that on the defensive side of the ball, not the offensive side of the ball, but they brought in Saquon Barkley to really round out that group. On the defensive side, I had a lot of gripe with their linebackers. They just didn't fit the bill for the Eagles. I thought they expected more talent there, more production out of that group. The defensive line was great. They got a lot out of Jalen Carter. Even with Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox there, older players, they were still able to contribute. They traded Hassan Reddick, but he wasn't really too much of the problem. You go to the secondary, the safety play wasn't great. Reed Blankenship did pretty well. They also had, I want to say Terrell Edmonds back there, and Kevin Byard at one point as well. That experiment, that addition didn't really work out well for them. You had a lot of just bad plays in the secondary, and also James Bradbury had a very rough season coverage-wise and just overall play. He took a lot of the heat as well. So they bring in younger guys, more guys that are talented, like the players that they have, but also that have proven that they are good players in this league. I think they needed that. I like those additions for them. And just on this topic of the miscues again, because it is interesting how Kenneth Gainwell put it in his statement. You look at the miscues and people not being on the same page. That sort of points out to me, and probably to some other people as well, a lack of leadership, you want to say, or a lack of just really reassuring all these fine details and just having someone there to make sure everyone's on the same page. Of course, a lot of that responsibility falls on the quarterback, so you could look at Jalen Hurts, but also a lot of people looked at Nick Sirianni and how capable he really was to be the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. It would have been a major change and a major process to look for another head coach. Not to say that I don't think Nick Sirianni deserves to be fired, but I do also kind of tilt my head a little bit and squint to look at Nick Sirianni. Yeah, maybe is he the coach? I don't know. I have my doubts as well. Maturity has been a topic brought up with him as well, how mature he is to really handle this job. But he stayed around. But now it also does turn into a bit more of a pressured situation because of all the guys that you brought in, because you already got rid of the coordinators. The only guy that's still left over is Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. You extended your receivers already, everyone on the offensive line. You're not going to get rid of them. So it's either all going to fall on Nick Sirianni or Jalen Hurts. I doubt they move on from Jalen Hurts. So if they underperform again this year with adding a guy like Saquon Barkley to that division. Everybody has them as the favorites. The guy that they're going to look to is unfortunately going to be Nick Sirianni, so there is more pressure now on Sirianni to get this all done. I like the moves that they've made. How good can they be now, and how can they rebound off of this? I mentioned people will have them as the favorites now, rightly so. I think they're going to win a good amount of games this year. I have confidence in them with these changes that they've made. They've committed to this group of guys already. They've extended A.J. Brown. They extended Devontae Smith. Jordan Mailata got one. Landon Dickerson got one. Saquon Barkley just was signed on a big deal. Jalen Hurts as well. Naming all of these guys, they've committed to this core group of guys. So, they're rolling with these guys. They have to find a solution to make it look better than he did. I believe that they can do it, but now, really with the more experienced coordinators, I think that'll surely help them. The Cowboys are in a weird spot. The Giants aren't really competitors right now. The Commanders also have a lot of uncertain pieces. The Eagles are the best suited team to take that division. This time, I think they will do it. And then once they get into the playoffs, hopefully they're in a better spot than they were last year. I have confidence in them. It's just a matter of when all these pieces fall in line and get on the same page rather than if. I'm looking forward to seeing it. It's gonna be a very competitive NFC, but we'll continue on with this show. One of the last breaks before we finish this last show of the week, we're going to be talking about Dre Greenlaw and how he looks back on the Super Bowl and how that injury sort of changed everything, not just for him, but also for the 49ers, as well as talking about the Lions' first-round pick, Terrion Arnold, and how he revealed a very unusual way that the Raiders decided on their draft pick at the number 13 spot. Stick around to find out more on those topics. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.